In 2013, hundreds of thousands of people frustratedly waited in lines venturing out of doors and around street corners in the U.S. simply so they could vote on an electronic touchscreen voting machine. My first contention is that machines will fail or malfunction. Technology has made life easier in terms of simplifying common tasks such as banking, publishing a book online, talking to friends, or paying for things online. When it comes to voting, however, technology is stuck in 2002. In a study from the New York University School of Law, next year 43 states will be using electronic voting machines that are all at least a decade old, and the price tag for replacement machines could top $1 billion. Laptops designed in the 1990s lasting 10 years are bound to result in failure, and the biggest risk for these machines is that they will fail or malfunction. Machines have been known to malfunction unpredictable ways in electronic voting machines during polls. Machines have been known to flip votes, double them, subtract them, and misreport tallies. A video from the 2012 U.S. presidential election showed a voting machine automatically switching votes that were cast for Barack Obama to Mitt Romney, and in one U.S. county election, a malfunction ignored over 5,000 cast votes, which is roughly one-third of the total votes cast in the election. Maryland had to pull machines out of circulation in the middle of an election just because the test screen went out of calibration. This means that the screen would register a voter's touch about an inch below the candidate he or she had selected, potentially casting a vote for the wrong candidate, and there's no telling what's getting reported. 14 years ago, it took an entire month for Americans to figure out who it was to succeed then. The ballots in Florida had to be recounted during the famous 2000 presidential election, largely due to failed voting technology that caused votes not to get counted or incorrect votes. The Election Commission of Pakistan Director General Information Technology Kazir Aziz candidly told the parliamentary body that the software used by electronic voting machines could be manipulated to affect the results. He said that electronic voting machines installed at polling stations were vulnerable to hacking via Bluetooth and other forms of wireless connectivity. In fact, he told members that the machines could even be tampered with while they were put away in storage. From these failings and malfunctions, lines will increase in voting booths. This will result in a crisis in confidence and voting system. With decade-old electronic voting machines states are using that are falling apart, voters are slowly losing access to their voting rights. My second contention is that machines can easily be hacked with this phenomenon of hacking, which has permeated every level of government over the past years. In 2008, researchers at Princeton University found that it took 7 minutes using simple tools to install a different computer program in a voting machine that steals votes from one party's candidates and gives them to another. That machine, which is called the Sequoia Advantage, is still used in at least 6 states by 9 million people today, according to Roger Johnston, who has a vulnerability assessment team in Oregon National Laboratory. Previous pilot programs in Washington, D.C. and West Virginia ran mock online elections for overseas military in 2010. But Alex Halderman, a University of Michigan computer science professor, and his team of students hacked the DC internet voting system almost as soon as it was up and running. My third contention is that funds and place of residence will greatly contribute to voting and voters. City voters who tend to be Democrats are more likely to encounter long lines due to voting restrictions, according to a 2012 report from the New York Times. More affluent countries and cities are able to spend more on elected administration, which gives them better staff and better machines. Places with lower incomes and a weaker tax base, on the other hand, don't have the funds to replace equipment and hire their desired staff, so voters end up getting served differentially depending on where they live. Even without ID laws, voters face obstacles at polling centers, having to wait hours to vote in some regions, partly because of too few and too outdated electronic voting machines. According to a new report from the Brennan Center for Justice, Black and Latino voters had to wait the longest to vote and had fewer machines to vote on. During the 2012 presidential election, Florida also suffered from long wait times up to 6 hours in some polling places that disproportionately affected the state's large Latino population. The state and its voting practices have been mentioned controversially before. Lines are longest when waiting for electronic voting machines, in part because only one voter can use them at a time, and it takes everyone a few moments to figure out how they work, says voting rights activist Rebecca Wilson. The 2000 presidential election in Florida spotlighted many problems with voting technology, like the design of ballots, the way ballots are counted, and the problems with things like punch card ballots. There's nothing to move on to. Most states are in the midst of a budget crisis and can't afford to upgrade machines. The biggest difficulty to replace them is the main issue of money. These machines are purchased with federal money, which isn't coming back, and in some cases the states will pay for new necessities, but it's usually the county that pays for it, says Wendy Underhill, director of the National Conference of State Legislators of Denver. Residents have to go to their county commissioners and argue that these are priorities, but in some cases it's hard to say this when you're up against school needs and perhaps even a building damaged by a fire, etc. My third contention is that voting will vary based off of how voters cast their votes and how these machines cooperate with the voters. There's also the question as to whether electronic machines are trustworthy in the first place. Voting technology experts aren't keen on letting voters use systems that have even the slightest possibility of being compromised. To ensure that people are able to exercise their voting rights, there must be a way to check over each entry because the electronic machines can have bugs or bad lines of code just like a personal laptop. All major tech companies, such as Apple for example, send out bug fixes, which also work as security patches. One of the issues with any kind of voting is that it's nearly impossible to determine if something has gone wrong. Paper ballots are still the dominant voting system in the U.S., with only about 1 in 4 voters using an electronic voting machine during election time, according to the Washington Post. The error rates with paper ballots are low, and ballots tend to be counted by a machine or by hand in the event of a recount or audit. With electronic voting machines, votes made on an individual machine are stored on a memory card that is read by a computer. But there's no way to make sure that the votes cast are correct. There's no physical proof that candidate A got more votes than candidate B. Another option could be using biometrics like fingerprint or retinal scans to authenticate voters and make the online processes more secure. But that brings its own risks. Imagine having your eyeball or your fingerprint scan attached to your vote. This option could compromise voters' privacy, as the voter should be the only person who knows who they voted for. Encrypting the transaction could work in theory, but there's always the possibility of a major security leak, much similar to the Heartbleed glitch that devastated 63% of the world's popular websites earlier this year. The glitch went undetected for 2 years and exposed consumers' social security numbers, banking information, usernames, and passwords for mobile apps and websites. With as many complaints that are being received about electronic